Hello, everybody. Scott Golden, Golden Opportunities Coaching here. Welcome for those of you who are new. Welcome back to those of you who are seasoned veterans of what we do around here. What we do around here is break down psychological, emotional, and coaching related topics into language that makes sense. And we try and keep it as simple as possible because people got to have enough complicated things going on in their daily lives that keeping it less than simple is kind of silly sometimes. And so today we're going to talk about 8 things that there's no use being shameful over. People deal with the emotion of shame in different ways, but shame can hold a lot of people back from the possibility of being successful. And so, if you are dealing with just feelings feelings of shame that have led you to get stuck, certainly reaching out for coaching can be a really helpful way to master your emotions and kind of deal with them in 2021 in a different and more powerful way. The first thing to not be ashamed of is the perception of failure. So, first of all, there is the reality that failure exists for everybody. No one ever does everything perfectly, no matter how it looks. And certainly with things like social media and being able to control our narrative and video editing and audio editing and auto tuning for singers and speech writers, because people often don't know how to speak off the cuff or off the top of their head. People will fail, and people will fail you. And so the concept of failure being a negative thing, I think, has become so centralized in society that it's like you're if you think you're going to get to a place in your life that you never fail at anything, you're deluding yourself into unrealistic expectations. One of the reasons that I don't edit my audios for either of my channels is because I want to come across as human. And I am a super believer in the fact that if I really don't like something, I can always record it again. I don't want to chop something up and have it come off produced in a manner that is disingenuous and not real to who I am as a person and not real to the life that I lead. And so a lot of people would say, "Oh, you've got to be more professional." And it's like professional is owning yourself and knowing that you're going to slip and you might say the wrong word, or you might cough when you are speaking, or you might have a bad hair day, so to speak. We're going to fail at things. The more comfortable we get with the perception of failure, and then the other thing is the idea that the only failure is when we quit trying. And so we have to really define for ourselves, what is failure. Did I fail because I got one question wrong on a test? Or did I fail because I stayed up all night the night before studying and could have made life easier on myself? The definition of failure in that is also important. The next is kind of like it, and that is the fear of rejection. Look, you were born with unique talents, skills, abilities, beauties, interests, and ways to communicate and ways to be. You were born unique, and so the idea that you will not face rejection in your life is just plain goofy. You're not going to connect with every person. You're not going to win in every situation. Can you? Yes. Will you? No. And that's okay. The more comfortable we can become with the idea that rejection actually is a gift, because if a person rejects us, if we get rejected for a job, if we get rejected for a promotion, it means that better can come now. Better than what we perceived to be the only option can come now. And if we don't face rejection, then we might settle. And a lot of times, people, especially in romantic relationships and friendships, will settle because they believe it's the best they can do. I know I've done that in my own life, and it never ends well, because in a lot of cases, what happens for most people is they settle, and then it takes months or years to realize they've settled, and by that point, you feel so obligated to stay in a situation, professionally, personally, whatever have you, that you might stay longer than you think you should, even though you know this isn't working. The other thing is fail others' expectations. This is important. So, different people, every person in your life has a different view of what success and failure are. And so, whether it's your parents, your boss, your significant other, your best friend, your mentor, they're going to have different standards. And at time, at times you're going to feel as though you failed them. And in reality, you probably will from time to time. That's okay. You're not supposed to live their life or their vision for your life. You're supposed to live your life, and when they intersect on a consistent and healthy basis for both people, that's good and healthy and a wonderful blessing. But at the same time, sometimes we outgrow people. Sometimes what a person wants from us isn't realistic for us to expect from ourselves. And sometimes we're not on the same page and we just need to communicate differently. When we accept that even the people that are closest in our life, we will fail from time to time, social interaction becomes so much easier. You know, some of the most valuable friendships I have are the people that I navigated falling short of their expectations and we talked it through. And we reset expectations for each other through the friendship or through the relationship. And we came out stronger because we learned what everybody's boundaries were and what everyone's limits were and where everyone could improve. And that's always a good thing. The next thing is feeling out of control. There are times that you cannot control an outcome of an event. You can't control if somebody gets sick. You can't control if somebody misinterprets what you say. You can't control if a person dies unexpectedly. You can't control a natural disaster. And there are things where you have to surrender. This isn't in my control. And it's admirable to want to be so in control that you prevent people from going through emotional difficulty and hardship and all those things. It is courageous to want to give people comfort and never lose that part of yourself. But at the same time, there are situations in the world where you're never going to meet every need every bit of every day. And the more we try to be perfect, the more we try to be the person who does that and is able to meet every need, the more stress we put on ourselves. Stigmas and judgments is another thing. Don't be ashamed if there are people who don't understand you or ridicule you or they're bullying because you're different. Look, people have bullied for years. I can say this. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean we shouldn't reject it as an improper way of behavior. But also, you're not going to change a society completely into a world of utopia where people don't pass judgment for what winds up being harsh or goofy or silly or needless things. I can tell you as a disabled person the number of people that have completely hurt my heart and just said, "Oh, just take a disability payment and be done with your life and just live that way for the next 50, 60 years." In my life, I've heard that literally hundreds of times. And every time I look and go, is that all you see? Is all you see my physical limitations because you're not seeing me if that's the case? And the stigma of being a disabled person or the stigma of having a physical abnormality, or the stigma of uh, going to prison, or the stigma of mental health issues. All of these things, yes, there are people that are going to judge you. No, it's not right. No, you're never going to change everybody, but if you can educate somebody to behaving differently so that they give more kindness, love, and acceptance in the future, you've done a powerful thing for the planet. And I think we all need to be more ready to accept two things. One, we all can be educators to help people change their viewpoints. And two, people are going to pass needless, harsh judgments whether we want them to or not. So we need to be ready for it. We need to find a way to stand up for ourselves, but not take things so personally that it cripples us emotionally, and that's a fine line to walk. And anyone who's dealing with stigmatization, anyone who's dealing with judgment in the now, please understand my sympathies and empathy is with you because A, I've been there, and B, I've in working with 15,000 people, I certainly have seen how judgment can cripple a person emotionally and mentally and lead them down a path that's just not healthy. And I it grieves my heart greatly that people do that to each other, but you're never going to get 100% compliance with kindness in society. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just means you got to have realistic expectations. The next is don't feel shame for your feelings. And I think this is so important. There are people who have very dark emotions, who want to take vengeance on people, who want to do violent things, who have attractions to other people when they're in a relationship, when people who struggle with sadness and they can't control it, people who struggle with anger and they don't feel they can control it, people who feel like outsiders, people who feel like they're hopeless. I think emotional suppression is probably the single most damaging thing to current humanity because if people cannot accept how they feel within themselves and find outlets of expression for them, it leads to things like addiction and abusive behavior and suicidal ideation and mental illness and all these things. Emotional suppression is at least a part of the equation with every negative social outcome to some degree. And I think when we have shame over feeling a way that isn't socially acceptable, no, I'm not saying act on your impulses to do negative things, but at the same time, admitting that you have the temptation to do them, I think is key and pivotal in the healing process of getting past it. In other words, imagine if someone who did a random shooting went to somebody and said, "Look, I feel like blowing up the world," or someone who, is terroristic in nature, and they said, "You know what? I feel like my religion's calling me to do this horrible thing," and they expressed the feelings honestly, and they had an outlet where society didn't judge them, just accepted them for the expression and said, "Okay, how can we change that?" so that excuse me, so that the negative outcome doesn't happen. I think we'd have a completely different world. I think when you segregate a society into this is the right way to behave and we don't talk about things that don't fall within that paradigm, I think you set yourself up for people acting badly and trauma happening and negativity happening. So suppression of feelings, don't do that to yourself. Don't have shame over the way you feel. There's no shame in putting yourself first. I think this is another big one too. And a lot of times people who are very empathic, people who are very sympathetic, people who are givers by nature, they put themselves in a position of almost martyrdom where you keep giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving without replenishing the well. And this actually ties with our last one, which is saying no. Sometimes the reality of needing to say no, the reality of needing to maintain healthy boundaries becomes almost like a life vest. It becomes something where you need to say no. You need to have that boundary, otherwise you're not going to be able to do anything for anybody. And my favorite thing is like if you run yourself into the ground taking care of somebody else, and I had this happen in my own life, and I can share really quickly. I was in a situation where I was taking care of some people emotionally and financially and in other ways. My rheumatism arthritis kicked up to the point where I almost died in 2018 at the end of that situation that didn't work out. For 15 months, I laid in a nursing home where I got completely subpar care and almost died. And I did that because I pushed myself too far and I didn't have proper boundaries. And a lot of times what happens is we think, oh, I can handle this even though most people couldn't. And it'll come out in your body, and it'll come out in your mental health, and it'll come out in not being able to focus on work. It'll come out in any way it needs to remind you that you do have limitations. And I think finding a way to put yourself first and say no when necessary, these are not things to be ashamed of. We all only have a limited amount of time on earth, and if we don't take proper care of ourselves, then we're going to shorten that time span. Anyway, hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully it allows you to kind of get to a place of deeper understanding. And I encourage you to keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.